Hi everyone, welcome to episode 71 of the Startup Playbook podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. After a few weeks off, I'm excited to be back. The time away gave me some great perspective on the things I'm doing and where I want to go with the show. So from next week, I'll be launching a new segment of the podcast called the Startup Playbook Hustle, which will feature some of the best up-and-coming founders sharing their stories, lessons, and future plans. If you're interested in being featured on the Startup Playbook Hustle, email me at rohit@startupplaybook.co or fill out the application form in the show notes for this episode. Also, I'll be doing a live podcast interview with Will Richardson from the Giant Leap Fund on Wednesday, the 22nd of November. It's a free event where we will touch on what Will looks for in investment opportunities, how the Giant Leap Fund balances impact and investment, and how companies can effectively use storytelling to engage their users, investors, and potential hires. I'll add the event registration link to the show notes for this episode at startupplaybook.co. So coming back to episode 71, as some of you may know, I spent a few days in Sydney last week at the TechCrunch Battlefield Australia event, and thanks to Julia Wells, I was able to chat to Aussie entrepreneur Chris Saad at the conference. Chris has spent the last 10 years in Silicon Valley, most recently as the head of product at Uber's developer platform, seeing the company grow from 3,000 to 17,000 employees during his time there. In this interview, we talk about the importance of showing up, building networks by adding value, paying it forward, and how hiring changes as companies scale. Without further ado, here is my interview with Chris Saad. Hi Chris, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Hey, no worries. Thanks for having me.
So for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur and founder. I was born and raised in Brizzy, or Briz Vegas, as we like to call it awkwardly. Just ever since I was in high school, was passionate about building stuff, tinkering with stuff, and passionate about business and writing, inventing, and computers. And so, found myself writing software and distributing it around school and getting in trouble with the IT department for breaking the standard operating environment on my laptop. At some point realized, this is called startups. This is called, business. And so I started a few startups and, web strategy consultancy company, and then started what was, back in the day, there was this thing called RSS, and there was RSS news readers, which is, it looks a little like your Facebook news feed, but it was using an open standard. And so I built a company around reading news and getting news on your desktop, which was called Faraday Media. And realized, if you want to make a world-class movie, you go to LA, you go to Hollywood. And if you want to do a world-class startup, you got to go to Silicon Valley. And, through a series of conversations with my advisors and mentors, they were like, no, you got to go to Silicon Valley. And this is 10, 12, 13 years ago. So there was nothing here in Australia. People would look at me really weird when I mentioned venture capital and startups. So, yeah, went over there and spent the last 10 years there, building a series of companies, and most recently was the head of product for the developer platform at Uber headquarters there. So, fantastic.
So, your decision to go to San Fran as well, obviously it's something that even now, more so than ever, a lot of founders recognize, the importance of going there and sort of really immersing themselves in the culture. What was that decision like for you at a time where, it wasn't, I assume there wasn't really a startup ecosystem or anything like that over here?
There was no startup ecosystem here, and there wasn't really a bridge to go over there. Like, there wasn't really accelerators or people who would take you by the hand and lead you there. And so I just kind of did it cold. The reason I went is, I had a couple of advisors and mentors who said to me, like, Chris, you're not in the environment where people are going to understand you. You're kind of talking, you're talking in a different language at a different time, and so you got to be in the valley. And all the fear and self-sabotage and, all the narratives you tell yourself in your head, like, I can't afford it, or I'll do it later, or first I've just got to. And I was lucky to have great advisors who just like, no, you're just making excuses. You're like, and we had this wonderful, brutal relationship with like, no, you're going to fail. Yeah, that's a fail. Just go. Stop making excuses. Go. And so ultimately, one of my mentors was like, grabbed me by the scruff of the neck. He's like, I'm going to go with you. Let's go. And so we went over there for a month in 2000 and I want to say 2007, 2006. And within a day or two, I was like, I'm home. Like these people are saying and speaking the same language. And it was just priceless. My only regret was not having gone sooner. And so that was the impetus. It was like, I have these ideas, I'm speaking this language, and no one around here is understanding that. And I'm told there's this mecca over there where people are speaking that same language. And then it ultimately was true. But I should say, having come back now, it's a very different landscape in Australia. There are a lot of people here talking that same language now. And I would say, in fact, in Australia, it feels like Silicon Valley 2007. It feels like a lot of energy, enthusiasm, openness, community vibe that was there in 2007 in the Valley. And so we're very lucky, actually. But I would still recommend anybody to go to Valley for at least a month at a time to really immerse themselves and get to know that scene.
Sure. Obviously, I want to come back to some of your experiences in San Fran and how that compares to what you're sort of seeing in the ecosystem now and how that sort of evolved and changed over time. But just going back to, you mentioned, people making excuses for not wanting to go. And I see the same thing in terms of developing relationships as well. As you mentioned, there are so many accelerator programs. There's things like the HEX program, which are literally there to help provide a guiding light between, bridging the gap between two different things. How would you recommend to someone who doesn't have the mentors or doesn't have the network in place to start developing those networks in a new city or a new environment?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is show up. And so the way I did it was, because I was in Australia having to try to build that network in the US, I did it via Twitter and blogging. At the time, blogging was like everyone had a blog and everyone was blogging. And now I would say it's somewhat Twitter, more Facebook. And what I did was I'd pay attention to what my heroes were saying. The great thing about something like Twitter is that your heroes and mentors and the people you're looking up to, they're literally articulating the thoughts running through their head. Like they're tweeting out the things they just read, the things that are top of mind, and the thoughts they're having. So you have a front row seat to their thought process. And so what I would do is I would interject, I would reply, and I would try to add value. And only if I had something that I thought was valuable. So I would build on their thought, or I'd point them to another link, or I'd say, hey, have you considered this? And over time, I think they started to understand, like, oh, hey, this kid has some interesting insights or some perspectives, or he's adding value to my life. And then when I had something new and original to say, I had built that slither of a relationship with them. And so there's this saying that I love, which is luck is opportunity meets preparation. And so that initial reach out was the preparation. And then when I had an idea or I saw a window, that was the opportunity. And I just kind of collided those two things. And so that's how I started the network. And then when I went there, I just went and met those people face to face and worked the room and things like that. And again, friends and mentors and connected. There's this wonderful culture in the startup ecosystem, which I'm sure you've spoken about on your show many times, is pay it forward. Mm-hmm. And so like, everyone who's achieved something has this responsibility to reach back and help the next person up. And so everyone's very generous and giving in that sense.
Absolutely. I just want to hone in on the providing value bit, because I see so many people wanting to develop relationships with VCs or with successful founders or that sort of thing. And as you mentioned, it's not just about being in that conversation or interjecting them, but it's making sure that you provide some value to help, as you mentioned, start developing that relationship. That won't happen over one tweet, but totally. It's the start of a conversation and start of a relationship with that particular person.
Yeah, the way I think about it is, it's imagine you're at a dinner party. How would you behave there? Like I had at a startup once that I was helping out, their quote-unquote social media manager was just like spamming everybody, like replying everybody, hey, check this out. And I said to her, like, if you were at a dinner party and someone was behaving that way, how would you feel, right? And so essentially it's not just being a sycophant, like liking and replying to everything, hey, that's funny, hey, that's great. It's just like, choose your moments, make sure that you have an actual thought that is building on their thought, or you challenge them and have it be a thoughtful, earnest challenge and speak with respect. But the key is to move the conversation forward, move the thought forward, or to make an introduction or give some value without thought or regard to how it's going to be given back to you. It can't be transactional. And then at some point, you'll have an ask, and that's when the time is right.
Absolutely. So moving forward into your role at Uber, do you want to sort of elaborate a little bit on sort of when you joined the company and some of the growth that kind of happened at Uber during your time there?
Yeah, well, as probably most people know, Uber is a hyper-growth startup. I think it's probably one of the most successful company or startups in the history of the world. And its growth curve is just, mind-boggling. And so I joined 3 and a bit years ago, when it was about 3,000 employees. So it was well and truly established. It was very successful without me. But in the time that I was there, it grew to 17,000 employees. And from a handful of cities to hundreds of cities. And my role was to lead the product strategy and the product process for what's called the developer platform. And so if you're familiar with like Facebook Connect and APIs and app development in general, you build these things on top of iOS, on top of Facebook, on top of Android. These are developer platforms. And so my job was to imagine Uber not as an app or not as a taxi company, but as a platform on top of which other developers, other startups could innovate and create value. And that it was to turn Uber into what we call a cloud logistics layer for the internet. And so I ran a team there that did that and learned a lot. It was an incredible company, an incredible group of people, an incredible mission, and an incredible impact on the world, and very very grateful and kind of humbled to have been a small part of it. It was really great. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, obviously, as you touched on, invariably you will learn so much from seeing a company grow from 3,000 to 17,000 in the space of 3 years.
Yeah.
But what were, I guess, some of the more unexpected learnings that you didn't expect from going through that process?
So, as a startup founder, you think you have a level of hustle and a level of quality of execution that you're very proud of, and you're working all hours of the day and night. And when you join something like Uber, where everybody is a AAA player, everybody is working their ass off, and they're very, very smart, and they're ex-Google, ex-Stanford, ex-Facebook, ex-whatever, you really learn what quality execution looks like, and what hustle looks like, and what impact looks like. And it recalibrates your expectations. So it recalibrates what you think impact is and what hustle is. And you just learn what a quality product looks like. Quality product meaning a quality product strategy, or a quality spreadsheet, or a quality deck, and also ultimately the quality product that you deliver on the market. And so I'm now doing strategic advisory for companies, and I like to say that people say that the best way to learn to understand what you know is to teach, and so I've learned now that through osmosis and through practice, I've learned a lot of stuff. It's hard to put your finger on any one thing, but it's kind of mind-boggling. Yeah.
In that environment where I guess things are moving so quickly, and there's that need for quality as well, how do you balance, or is there a balance between speed and quality, especially when it comes to product?
Yeah, so Jeff Holden, who was the head of product at Uber, he used to like to say, we make cupcakes, not cakes. And so, another way of saying that is like MVP, right, versus minimum viable product. And so it's figure out what a really high quality but small version of the thing that you want to do is, and then ship it, and then learn, collect the data, and iterate. And so you try to do both speed and quality. You try to ship a really high quality, simple version of the thing that you had in mind. Maybe you just you bucket tested, A/B tested, or you release it to a small segment of the rider base or the driver base, and then learn, iterate, ship again. And so that's really it's a cliche at this point in the startup ecosystem, but it's like lean, agile development. Of course, the art and the science of it is figuring out what is the cupcake version. And the best metaphor I've seen for that is the MVP of a Ferrari is not 4 wheels. It's a bicycle. So what that means is if the problem you're solving is getting from A to B, you actually need a complete solution to get someone from A to B, even if it's slow and manual. And then the next thing is the scooter, and then the motorbike, then the hatchback, and then the Ferrari. And so what you'll find from experienced product managers is they know how to figure out what the bicycle is of your Ferrari idea and how to get from the bicycle to the Ferrari. And that's the way you balance speed and quality.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I see a lot of founders making the same mistake when it comes to the MVP, is not really testing the core hypothesis of that business,
That's
which
right.
is getting from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And it can be hard to distill that because again, most founders to a degree are visionaries. They have this huge grand idea of what this product looks like 5-10 years down the track.
Yeah.
Is there a way that that you do this for yourself, or any recommendations that you have that would allow founders to help distill that and get to that bicycle a little bit easier?
Yeah, so I found founders tend to fall in love with a kernel of an idea, and they may be attached to the wrong thing, and oftentimes, I'll give you an anecdote. So oftentimes when I'm working with startups, they've got these pitch decks, and they go for 5, 7, 10, 20 slides, and they haven't actually described what the problem is. And like the first thing it's like kind of like the IT crowd. You go, have you turned it off, on and off again, right? Or off and on again. And it's like my first advice to most people making a deck is like, slide 1 should be, what is the problem? And oftentimes they actually don't know what the problem is because they're fallen in love with, I want to build an app, or I want to build a community, or I want to do this. And so the advice I guess I would give is go back to first principles. What is the problem? What is the pain? What is the inefficiency that you have felt in the world? Then the way you go about solving that is incident. It's that you have a series of hypotheses that you go test, but the core question is, what is the problem that you're seeing? And you actually may be wrong about that too, but start at least there. And so I don't know if that isn't the entire answer, but it has to start with going back to what is the problem you're solving, and then the next question is it a really big problem, and will it scale, or is it a niche thing that only 1%ers care about, or that you think is a problem but no one else thinks is a problem, and things like that.
Yeah, I had Ash Murray, creator of the Lean Canvas, on the show, and I think one of his sort of quotes was, love the problem, not the solution.
Yes.
Which is along the very similar lines.
Exactly.
If you're, as you mentioned, if you're focused on the problem, you will find the right solution for that.
That's right.
Versus having a set solution in mind and trying to associate a problem.
Most founders are in love with their solution, or they've even built something and they're searching for a problem for it. And I say this, I'm fully admitting I'm very guilty of having done this multiple times. And so I like to say with my strategic advisory, I help companies avoid all the mistakes I've already made. So nothing I'm saying is like, I'm not trying to say, I'm a genius at this. It's just I've done it more times and figured out, made all the mistakes, and just trying to help people fast forward to the future.
Sure. Also a big part of, growing from 3,000 to 17,000 people is growth in people.
Yes.
How do you approach building teams? And does what you're looking for in team members change at all between when you're hiring, when you're a company of the size of 3,000 compared to when you're at 17,000?
Yeah, so I learned a lot about how to organize and hire teams at Uber. Actually, when I joined Uber, I didn't think of myself as a very good recruiter and hirer. Hirer, is that a word? I don't know. But
it is now.
It is now. But I later got signal from colleagues and friends like that I was actually ended up being very good at hiring. And a lot of that I learned from Uber and my colleagues there. And I also learned what not to do. Because Uber has obviously gone through some cultural challenges, and some of that is a result of just growing too fast. And so I don't think it necessarily changes what you're looking for. I mean, I guess it does, because you're solving different problems at different stages of growth. But there are some fundamental things you're always looking for. And the best way I learned at Uber to hire great people is to forget all the theoretical puzzles and mind games and all that crap, and just focus on what is the role they're going to be doing, and pretend they've started. It's day one, and just start we used to call it jam on the problem, brainstorm on the problem together with them, and just see how their intuition is. Do they have practical, rational thought process for how they think through that problem? Allow for the fact that they don't necessarily have tribal knowledge and some of the knowledge you have about the problem, but just are they rational, thoughtful, practical solutions to this problem? And do they take ownership over the solution? So, when they tell you that solution, like, okay, and who would own that? Who would be responsible for that? Who would you want to hire to do that? And if their first answer is, I would hire a big team, and I'd go, like, that's a red flag. You want to see a sense of ownership over that solution as well. And what I found, actually, is the moment you start asking people to solve the actual problems you have in your business, or at least think through them with you, 90% of people don't know where to begin, or start giving you crazy science fiction answers. And 10% of people or 5% of people will just give you rational, obvious, simple stuff. And those are the ones you want. And when I really learned that was I was a serial entrepreneur. I'd never really interviewed for a job before. And I was interviewing for Uber. And my hiring manager asked me all these questions. And halfway through, I stopped him and I said, look, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm giving you really stupid, obvious answers here. Is there something else that I'm missing? And he said, no, that's great. Most people, this is not obvious to most people. And it clicked in my brain. Oh, that's what I should be looking for. People it seems they're just giving you obvious answers. You're in the top 1, 2, 5, 10% of the population.
Sure. In terms of personality and things like that too, are there any sort of key characteristics that you look for in people? And how do you test for that if you do?
Yeah, there are some of these cliche questions like, how have you dealt with, give me an example of how you dealt with conflict or whatever, or what's your superpower, what's your biggest weakness. These are fairly cliche questions, and then you can pressure test them. But what you're looking for is someone who has a lot of ownership, and they're not delegating things to other people. And they also take a lot of responsibility for their failures. So, when they say something failed, they're not saying everybody else failed me. It's I failed to identify this, and this, and and I had a couple of other things go wrong that are externalities. But you want to see a great deal of ownership over the execution, a great deal of ownership over any of the failure, a lot of humbleness about their success, understanding that some of it is luck and some of it is timing and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, and just kind of, as much as possible, and this is not always possible in Australia because it's a small ecosystem, but as much as possible, some experience in the problem domain so that they can help fast forward to the future. And so why are they uniquely qualified to work in this particular role at this particular time? Are they in the same vertical? Have they worked the same role before, and things like that? That's not mandatory, but if you're hiring for senior people and you want to move really fast, that's nice, very nice to have.
Sure. And in terms of moving fast as well, in terms of the hires, so I've heard this from people at other fast-growing companies, but really interested to know what your experience was at Uber. Does it shift at all from looking at generalists for a specific role versus specialists?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a cycle? Is there a specific thing, or
Yeah.
or is there a cultural preference for one that the company sort of sticks to?
Yeah. So this is what I was saying earlier, which is you're right. As the company matures, you do start to look for slightly different things. I think when you're early stage, you want more of the generalists, and you want people who are, especially if it's a startup, you want people who are not risk averse, who have abundance thinking. So this is actually, you raised a good point, which is one of the things I always look for is abundance thinking. As the head of product for the developer platforms and ecosystems require people who think in abundance terms, who believe that if you involve a lot of people, the pie grows, and they're not taking something away from you, they're adding value in. Most people in the world have a scarcity mindset. And so actually when I was hiring for the developer platform, I would have a few litmus test questions to see whether they think in abundance terms. And so that's one thing I look for in hiring as well. But so back to your question. You want people who are entrepreneurial, who are hustlers, who are willing to, who have a history of, I was thrown in the deep end for XYZ. I had no idea, but I learned it, I figured it out, and I solved it, and then I moved on to the next thing. And you want to see that they've been promoted, they've been thrown into the deep end multiple times, and they've solved for that problem. That's really, really important in the early stages of a startup. And then as you get bigger and mature, and you start identifying very specific gaps in your team, then you want to start looking for people who are in love with that problem. They love spreadsheets. They love solving tickets. They're like OCD about closing tickets out, and that's who you want for your support person, right? And so that's when you start to get more and more specific, and that kind of thing. And then also hiring from within. So, obviously you want to find people who are doing a great job, who are already coordinating their colleagues and managing their colleagues, and you make them team lead immediately. And in fact, don't hire managers. So hire people to do the job. And when they say to you, will I be a manager? Will I hire people? Like, you do the job, do it super well, demonstrate a sense of leadership amongst your peers, and then we'll talk about who's going to be the leader when there's a team to lead. And don't hire people who want immediately to be given some lofty title and responsibility.
Fantastic. And obviously, as you mentioned, you're now back in Australia, based in Brisbane?
I'm mainly based in Brisbane. My family's in Brisbane, so, spend a lot of time with them.
Sure. And as you mentioned, the ecosystem has changed a lot since you first left for San Fran. Do you want to share what some of the changes are that you're sort of seeing in the ecosystem? Obviously, considering that we're at TechCrunch Battlefield.
TechCrunch Battlefield.
In Sydney.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, when I left Australia, it was a complete desert. There was nobody here. The word startup was completely foreign. My friends were like, well, when are you going to go work for Telstra or go work for, some big enterprise company and stop tinkering with this, software that you're doing? And the measures of success in Australia were, do you have a BMW and a McMansion and, can you buy gadgets? It was not, what value have you created? What have you built? And so just the measures of success, the language, all of that was not here, and that's all here now. There are people who value creation. There are people here who value insights and ideas and thoughtfulness about the future and trend tracking and being a little philosophical. Actually, abundance mindset even as well, having a sense that the pie is very, very big and the world is very, very big. All of that was not here 10 years ago, at least not in the communities I ran. And so I don't want to make absolute statements, not in the communities the circles I ran in. And so that's all new. And many of my friends and colleagues who went out to the Valley from Australia, Rachel and Clay Cook and Julia Wells and Marty Wells and Mick Lubinskas and Dean McAvoy, and these guys are all now the OGs. Like, we all went to the Valley 10 years ago, and many of them came back ahead of me, and they've created this amazing thing, and including TechCrunch, right? Julia Wells has set up this TechCrunch thing, and these are my family, my found family, and so it's so thrilling to not just see the community here, but to see the impact they've made, bridging and pulling that culture back here is so exciting. I'm so happy for them and for the community here. It's great. And TechCrunch, wow. Yeah, I was when I first went out there, I was sleeping in Mike Arrington's guest room, the guy who founded TechCrunch, and got to know TechCrunch from a very different point of view than the rest of the world. And now to see it still thriving and now coming to Australia is very exciting.
It is such an exciting time as well. Like even just seeing how much the ecosystem's changed over the last 2 to 3 years has been incredible.
Yeah. That's what I've been told, is a lot of this is even just the last 2 or 3 years. And what I will say is, if I haven't already, this is just like Silicon Valley 2007, which was the start of the Web 2.0 social media growth curve of the valley. They were coming out of the dot-com bust. Everybody was disillusioned and poor. And around 2006, 2007, it started bubbling up again. And the optimism started creeping back in again. And TechCrunch started to become a thing. And Read Write Web and Dig was a thing. And Twitter was just starting to become a thing. And blogging and RSS. And everyone, the excitement, the electricity in the air was starting to come back into the valley. And that's when I went out there. And this is what Australia feels like now. It's like, back then there wasn't a lot of capital, there wasn't a lot of big success stories, but there was a lot of enthusiasm. And that's what's happening here. I don't think there's a lot of capital. I don't think there's a lot of experienced operators yet. But if Australians keep coming back from the valley, and some of these startups will fail, and they should fail because they're not great ideas or they're not great operators, these people yet. But they will. That's part of the process. Part of the process of the renewal. These batches of startups, many of them will fail. They'll learn what they didn't know, and then they'll fold that into the next startup and the next startup, and then it'll grow and grow and grow, and it's very exciting.
Absolutely. Given that it's 10 years on, as you mentioned, from what. Kind of feeling very similar to what San Fran was like in 2007. What are some of the things that Australia can learn or that you would like to see more of here in the ecosystem?
Well, I think a lot of the foundational things are in place, which is this abundance mindset, this community spirit, and this enthusiasm. All new, all essential ingredients. I think what's missing is there needs to be more capital, and there needs to be more biz dev and corp dev in the large enterprises. So what I mean by that is I don't want to out anybody, but I was having a conversation the other day where these investors were talking about a founder, and they said, he's a great guy, he's got a strong handle on his business, he's got domain expertise, he's on trend for marketplace-based solution to an old world problem. It's probable that there'll be more automation and therefore more efficiency and margin in the business, but we just couldn't invest in him because we're not sure if that'll happen or not, if that margin will come in or not. And that's big red flags for me. It's like the investment should have been made. It should have been made in that guy or girl, and even if he fails, firstly the bet should have been that he'll figure it out. The bet should have been that those trend lines will continue. And the bet should have been, even if he fails, he will recycle back and come back to the next one and have learned and benefited. And it's still a little bit of like, we have precious little capital and we need to make some precious investments. You should be rational and thoughtful and diligent, but we need to make bets and not just bet on sure things. And we need to be focused on growth, not revenue. Because... and also we need to be focused on the US and China markets, not on the Australian market. There's a big world out there, and there's only 20 million people in Australia. So that's the big one as well. So you want to look for startup founders who are passionate. You want to be okay to lose a little money. It's okay. And you want to have people focused on international markets real quick. And it's, often the argument is, well, we just want to prove it out in Australia first. What you're proving is that you can live in a scarcity environment with Australian regulation and Australian scarcity, but like that doesn't actually prove anything about the US or China market. So go bigger or go home.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously we've spoken about this on the podcast several times as well. Again, really interested to get your thoughts. Based on the conversations and my experience that I've had, it feels that in the US there's a much more competitive environment between the investors. So the capital is a big one, but it feels like there's more competition, and it's almost the FOMO of if I don't invest in this founder, I miss out on this potential opportunity. Yep. Again, the abundance mindset of like this might turn into something great. Yep. I don't want to lose out on that opportunity. Versus over here, it's almost a case of we'll see all of the deals that come through. There's no rush to invest, and so we can take more time and be more careful. And there isn't that need to compete or that urgency around it. Well,
these are all symptoms of low density environment, right? So there aren't that many startups, there aren't that many people, and there isn't that much capital, and there isn't that many VCs. And also there isn't that much desperation, because if you live in Australia, you've got a great safety net. All your mates are drinking beer and playing cricket on the weekend. And so, countries optimize for different kinds of outcomes. And Australia has been optimized for lifestyle, not for entrepreneurship. And that's the truth. That's the decision we've made as a society. We need to make very intentional decisions to break out of that mold and to force ourselves to think differently. Or we'll always be just having like an innovation show instead of an innovation culture. And so, again, I'm seeing very positive early signs, but you can't have VCs and angels walking around going, I'm an investor, I'm an angel, but they're actually not actually putting money down and actually taking risks. And I'd love for a fund to come together and say, our job is to invest early, often, and take big risks, and just like agitate the others to have to move faster. And that'll come. And so, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, right? It's going to come. It's part of the maturation process. And as the maybe Silicon Valley VCs come in and start to compete a bit more, as some of these startups have bigger wins, as the Atlassian and other success story, the millionaires and wealthy kind of people from there start to filter into the ecosystem, as a lot of the Aussies start to come back from the Valley, it's gonna continue to mature and go well. So I should be very clear. I'm very optimistic and bullish and excited about what I'm seeing. But we just got to watch out for the landmines and hustle, move fast. Absolutely.
And so being back in Australia now, what's your main focus here? And what are you looking for?
Yeah, so it's kind of evolved very quickly. I've come back. I've been here for 3 months. My initial impulse was just, hey, I'll come back, see my family, remind them that I exist. I've missed a lot of milestones and weddings and things like that. So initially my idea was just to come back and say hi. I've then stumbled into this wonderful ecosystem and been very pleasantly surprised. So that's an enticement to stay a little longer. And I've been fortunate to build a good reputation and network in the Valley. And so I'm kind of working in the Valley and in Asia and India while being physically present in Australia. And so that's kind of what I'm doing a lot of. And I'm doing a lot of, again, pay it forward. So I'm just kind of trying to give back to the community with no agenda or expectation of any return right now. And I'm also doing a lot of strategic advisory, which is paid advice to small, medium, and large companies. As I said at the beginning, just helping them to avoid a lot of the mistakes I've made and learn from the Silicon Valley lessons that I've learned. And so that's what I'm doing that on retainer with a bunch of companies. And I'm having a lot of fun.
Sure. Is there a particular sweet spot of companies that you like, or that would be sort of worthwhile for them to sort of reach out to you?
Yeah. So my main heuristic is, I have limited bandwidth, and so a little bit like an angel investor, I want to have a portfolio of companies that I really, really believe in, and the things I believe in are companies that are doing things that I think will have a chance of disrupting or moving the needle on fundamental things in society, like ride sharing and turning cars into a service. That's a fundamental disruption in society. We work at how people think about space and office and renting and management of property. That's a fundamental change in the way society works. I'm working with companies in Australia that are doing electric vehicle stuff and energy grid stuff, and it's fundamentally changing the way energy is produced, consumed, and monitored. And so basically I'm just looking, I don't care how small or big they are, I'm just looking for companies that have a big disruptive vision and product. And I'm looking for companies where I think I can add real immediate value and move the needle for them in a legitimate way. Because the last thing I want to do is just be collecting checks from companies and just, eroding their runway and adding no value. So I want to be able to make sure that they're doing something exciting, and I feel like I can earnestly add real value real quick. And so happy to hear from anybody and everybody, and I'll be just super blunt with you if I think I can help and if I think I can't. And at the very least, I'll just help connect you to the people who I think can help you.
Fantastic. On that note, Chris, thanks so much for coming on the show and for sharing your experience and insights.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
For anyone that wants to say hello, find out more, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can just go to chrissaad.com. That's my personal website. And I'm Chris Saad on everything, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. So Chris, S-A-A-D. And so that's my last name. So yeah, just find me on the interwebs, and I'm happy to chat.
Perfect. I'll make sure those links are in the show notes. Once again, Chris, thanks for your time.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to episode 71 of the Startup Playbook podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Chris, along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at episode 72 next week.